In 1137, Malachy, the Archbishop of Armagh, resigned his post and went to Rome to discuss his future with the Pope. On the way, he called into Clairvaux Monastery and he spoke to Saint Bernard, who had founded that monastery. Now, Bernard was a follower of Benedict and had set up Cistercian monasteries in France. Malachy was so impressed with the monastery at Clairvaux and with Saint Bernard that he resolved to become a Cistercian monk himself. And he spoke to the Pope about this, but the Pope denied him and sent him back to Ireland as papal legate. When he arrived back in Ireland, he invited the Cistercians to come and set up monasteries in Ireland. One of those monasteries that was set up in the pre-Norman invasion days was Castro Dei at Fermoy. Bernard is still a common Christian name amongst the Fermoy people. And behind me here is St. Bernard's Well. The abbey was called Castrum Dei, which means the stronghold of God. It stood here from Abbey Lane, running down west of us here. It would have been a church which was cruciform in shape, standing on the north side of the abbey. And then there would have been a cloisters in the middle and the amenities, the refectory, the kitchens, the dormitories. The hospital would have stood maybe on the south side. That would be normal for a Cistercian monastery. They were standard in their design. The abbey would have run from Abbey Lane here west down towards Waterloo Lane, which would have been the bottom end of the abbey. This is where the abbey of Sancta Maria de Castro Dei was built. After the Synod of Rathbrazel in 1111, the Church in Ireland became organised into a diocesan system. When the Bishop of Cloyne was appointed, he took possession of lands of various Celtic monasteries that were in decline and disappearing. Included amongst those would have been Kilconoin, which would have been up behind here on the northern slopes of Corran Hill. Some of the lands of this abbey were granted to a Cistercian monastery in 1170, so the Cistercians could build a monastery on the banks of the Blackwater River here. The Cistercian abbeys in Ireland were manned by French abbots and monks. Gradually, Irish monks joined them, and over the following 50 or 60 years, their number increased. Eventually, there were Irish abbots as well as French ones, and there was some disagreement between the two cultures. There was a conspiracy at Mellifont in 1227, at which the Irish abbots attempted to change the ways of the Cistercians. This was dealt with very harshly and severely, and Stephen of Lexington came from England to deal with the problem. He visited the abbeys and excommunicated some of the abbots, including the abbot of Castrum Dei in Fermoy. The new rule which was imposed on the Cistercian monasteries was that in order to be a monk, you had to be able to confess in French or Latin. And this caused a major problem for the Irish monks, and there was great unrest. The new abbot appointed to Fermoy was a hardliner, and in 1230 he was murdered. All of the Cistercian monasteries were provided with a grange. It was their farm, how they grew their own produce to feed themselves and for an income. And Fermoy was no different. The grange for Fermoy Monastery is still called the Grange and is now a stud farm. and it's over on the north bank of the Blackwater to my right here. They also had lands at Johnstown and Dunmahon near Glanworth, which is slightly further north. Between them, they would have amounted to approximately 1,040 acres. In those days, the River Blackwater would have been much lower than it is now, as there was no weir at Fermoy Bridge. In order to gain access to their farmlands, the monks used the old ford that was here at the top of Barnan across to the Grange. The monks in 1301 built the first weir on the Blackwater, which may have been at this point, in order that it didn't interfere with their ford. But it did provide them with a mill race between the island here and the bank. This would have given them the place to build a mill which ground the corn that they produced on their farm in order to feed them and to sell for commercial reasons. In the early 14th century, the Desmonds of North Kerry took control of Fermoy and of Fermoy Abbey. They confiscated lands from the abbey, so the income declined. Various skirmishes took place over the following 100 years or so, and also the Black Death swept through the country in general in the middle of the 15th century. All of this stood to reduce the income of the abbey, so that in 1467 it was stated that the abbey could no longer afford the upkeep of its own property, and so was in decline. The graveyard for Castrum Dei ran east from Abbey Lane over here towards the bridge, which exists today. In the early 16th century, vocations had greatly reduced countrywide in the abbeys in Ireland, so that they were under huge pressure and all in decline. Fermoy Abbey had virtually closed by 1542 and was officially suppressed and closed under Queen Elizabeth in 1560.